Okay. Hi, everybody. Can you hear me okay? I think so. All right. So I'm a little bit speechless right now after hearing Butch's remarks. And I have to say, this feels like part of our historic moment. For Butch to be talking about Annie Young is pretty amazing because Annie Young connects us. Annie Young was a something of a mentor and was definitely a role model for me when I first met her. I think it was in 2012, and she was the exemplary Green Party public servant who really showed what it meant to be serving the community. She was the commissioner of parks for Minneapolis and an amazing public servant. I think she had been elected in the late 80s and was in office for decades. I met her towards the end of her career, but she was amazing in her sense um, of our stewardship of the planet and our membership in the planet and our service of the planet. And she exemplified deep green values as well as social and racial justice. And it's so ironic and astonishing, and it seems so right that in meeting Butch, we had all these things in common, and that Annie was effectively his second. So it completes the circle. It connects the dots. In the same way, I have to say that bringing Butch into this campaign connects us with a very deep history. As a historian of colonialism and imperialism and genocide, it gives so much more depth and knowledge to our work and to our purpose. And to me, it just affirms how this historic moment is it's in the cards. It is so much a product of what we have been preparing for. So many of us who have been working to build the Green Party, who have been running as candidates, who have been building the structures of our state and local parties. It's as if we have all been prepared for this moment when the world needs us like never before, when we are facing absolutely existential crises in all dimensions of our lives. So I just want to say that I'm kind of getting goosebumps repeatedly now in these conversations that we are having with the party and with Butch now as part of our team. It feels like we have been deepened, we've been broadened, and that we are now truly at a breakthrough moment, a breakthrough in terms of our effectiveness as a movement, in the size of our movement, in reaching critical mass, in reaching critical understanding. What we are offering now to the body politic is totally unprecedented, deep, wise, and so urgently needed as we face this crisis, these converging crises of endless war and genocide abroad, and the crisis here at home, the crisis of crushing inequality, of climate collapse, and the war on our democracy. So it just feels so right, so just, so exciting, and so absolutely unstoppable as so many movements come together. We are the only campaign which is anti-genocide, anti-war, pro-worker, climate emergency. We're the only such campaign that already has a majority of electoral votes and which is on track now to be on the ballot for most voters across the country. So we actually have critical mass to truly challenge empire and to truly replace this illegitimate and criminal political leadership that we are currently challenging. And it's no surprise that the mainstream media and the other institutions of communications are suppressing us. The Democrats, as we know, are pulling out all the stops to try to shut us down, to try to silence us. They have hired their army of lawyers, which they announced proudly last spring. They are advertising for infiltrators and for spies, and they have specifically seized $300,000 approximately and counting of matching funds, which we would be using now to complete our ballot drives, but they've been hanging on to that money for about a month. So we have been pushing very hard, and we are grateful to all the support that is helping us achieve those ballot drives, the volunteers and the contributions, because it takes dollars as well as bodies to do this. So they are quaking in their boots. Empire knows that its days are numbered, because we are rising up and we are unstoppable together, and we are offering specifically what the American people are desperate for. And we are, as Americans, we are facing crisis in virtually every dimension of our lives, these converging existential crises. The need for change has never been so urgent, and the possibility of that change has never been so clear and present and within our reach. In the last election in 2020, 1 out of every 3 eligible voters chose not to vote for the 2 candidates that were being rammed down their throats. This is a revolution in the making. Who is it that does not vote? In large measure, it is people of low income, people of color, and youth. So this is exactly, the people that we are speaking to, who our agenda represents. So the possibility is very much there for us not only to run strong, for us to break the mold, for us to break the duopoly, but even for us to prevail and to even win the White House. And no one should tell any of us that that is not possible. This is absolutely possible. Remember, there will be 3 pro-war, pro-genocide candidates on the ballot. We will be the one campaign which is anti-genocide, anti-war, pro-worker, pro-youth, pro-healthcare as a human right, pro-rent control, pro-climate action, emergency action, Green New Deal, etc. There are so many movements that are begging for representation right now, and we represent the movements of justice really across the board. So there really is a possibility for us to unify those who have not sought fit to vote before. And I must note that as we go across the country, as this campaign rolls out, it is unbelievably moving to see people's response to a real politics of integrity, a real politics that reflects everyday people. When we start out and we have these town hall meetings, they become very much like bonding sessions, like community building sessions. People are bringing their hearts on their sleeves, feeling really distraught about the state of our nation and the state of our communities and the state of our lives. And people are regularly in tears, expressing their distress at the state of our world and the feeling of disempowerment and the feeling of actual joy that we are discovering each other as a community, discovering our numbers, discovering our strength, discovering the power of our wisdom and our vision together. So I just want to reaffirm that this campaign is not a hypothetical. It is not tilting at windmills. It is not some quixotic concept. This is real. And that when you have 3 pro-genocide candidates that will be splitting the pro-genocide, pro-war vote, and then a 4th, which is anti-war and anti-genocide and pro-worker, you can actually see a 4-way split in the vote. This is possible. In a 4-way split, a vote can be won with as little as 26% of the vote. So I just really want to remind people that that do not accept, do not even listen to the voices that tell you that this is hopeless or that we are powerless, or that we are spoilers. No, quite to the contrary. We really are a voice for the people and a vehicle for this moment of revolution that we are truly in, that people have been begging for. So this is reason for us to double down, in our organizing, in our outreach. This is a matter of implementing Politics 101. This is about signing up to be a part of the phone banking, of the canvassing, of the tabling, of distributing flyers, of the social media projects that we will be conducting, that, the campus tours that we will be entering into, holding the house parties, which we will be supporting through various materials. I mean, all of this will be supported through campaign materials and organizers to help support this work. This movement is really in our hands. This moment is in our hands. And I can't stress to people enough about the unlimited possibilities that we are facing at this moment. A few words about, what we are fighting back against. As you know, we are facing existential crisis in virtually every dimension of our lives. Over 60% of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck. Half of renters are paying between 30% and 50% of their monthly income just to keep a roof over their heads. So many are living within 1 to 2 paychecks of being evicted. Evictions are at an all-time high. Homelessness is at an all-time high. And those without homes now are being criminalized even for attempting to sleep in public when they do not have a home. And this is all the more outrageous given that there are so many more unoccupied homes, many times more unoccupied homes than there are homeless right now. So this is absolutely criminal that the homeless are being criminalized themselves by the Supreme Court and by elected officials who are now using that Supreme Court ruling as an excuse to do sweeps through the encampments, to rob homeless people of their few treasured possessions, and to displace them. It is hard enough being homeless. It is a threat to one's health and even to one's life to become homeless. And now for that to have criminalization added on top of that is absolutely unthinkable. This is one of the many outrages that we are fighting. We are fighting the fact that millions upon millions, 44 million, in fact, young people and not so young people are locked into student debt, which should be abolished, which Joe Biden ran on the promise of abolishing and which he barely scraped the surface of. We can abolish medical debt. Half of young people describe themselves as homeless about the future because of the climate crisis, because of the economic crisis, because of the housing crisis, because young people have been denied the ability to have a family and to be able to support that family with decent jobs, and our jobs are in fact becoming increasingly incapable. Basically, our low income are not even a livable wage. People are below the income. It's approximately, I think, 30% of workers now are below the minimum income that they need just barely to survive. The environmental crisis, as many have mentioned today, is accelerating over the cliff. A recent study showed something like 60,000 people in the EU died from heat waves last summer alone. We don't have the figures in the United States because who's counting? People do not want to count, but you can be sure if 60,000 have died in Europe, that the numbers are comparable here. We're looking at millions of acres that are now burning in wildfires that are currently out of control this summer already. We're looking at a drought in the Colorado River, which just so happens to feed the California agriculture system, supplying half of the fruits and vegetables for this country. It is accepted science across the board that the Colorado River is within 1 to 2 years of shutting down. So if we think we have seen food inflation, get ready because it is about to go through the roof. Wildlife populations have declined by 70% over the last 50 years. Anybody who has their eyes open in any way knows that we are a part of the web of biodiversity. as that web goes down, we are going down with it. So we have indeed a climate emergency. Before I come to the solution for that, which is also within our reach, I want to mention the companion to the desperate state of affairs here in this country is, of course, the militarism and the empire that the U.S. Pretends to be. Yes, we are an empire because we are the dominant military force, but we are an empire on its last legs, in its last moment, looking at its last days. And this empire is doubling down. Our military policy for decades has been described by the Pentagon as full spectrum dominance, meaning that we will be the dominant player in all realms of competition all across the planet, in cyberspace, in outer space, in flight, on the landscape, on the sea surface, and under the water. That we will dominate all of those spheres in all areas of the globe. And obviously, we have, our military has been sent, according to the Congressional Research Service, our military has been sent in some 250 times in the last 3 decades alone. So, we are, as Martin Luther King said decades ago, we are the greatest purveyor of violence in the world today. It was true then, it's even truer now. And this absolutely toxic, over-the-top militarism is destroying us from within. It is not only impoverishing us here at home, it is also endangering us and the rest of the world. The crisis of the genocidal war against Gaza is in many ways a microcosm of U.S. empire. And to fix the crisis in Gaza, we must also address the empire. There's no way to definitively fix this crisis without also addressing empire. As Ronald Reagan, Secretary of Defense, said back in the mid-'80s, Israel is the unsinkable battleship for the U.S. in the Middle East. And this notion that the U.S. should be, working on some 800 bases all over the globe in order to control the world's resources. This is absolutely unsustainable. We are no longer the world's dominant economic power, and for us to attempt to be the world's dominant military power is absolutely, disastrous. This is suicidal for the U.S. empire and homicidal for the rest of the world. And we are seeing these conflicts now go marching relentlessly towards nuclear conflict, both in the Middle East, not only that the U.S. has nukes, Israel has nukes, Iran is networked with Russia, who has recently, supported Iran and sending more armaments to Iran. China has done the same thing. I don't know that they're arming Iran right now, but they've expressed solidarity with Iran. And of course, both China and Russia have nuclear weapons, Russia just as many as we do, and perhaps more advanced delivery vehicles as well. So this is an unbelievably dangerous conflict that is being inflicted on the people of the Middle East, the people of the world, and that includes the US of A. It's very important and rarely mentioned that any nuclear conflict is basically global. You cannot have a localized nuclear conflict. Even if the detonations are local, the consequences are global. It doesn't take an exchange of very many nuclear weapons to trigger nuclear winter. Just one nuclear-armed submarine, and the U.S. has 14 of them. Russia has, I think, about a comparable number. But just one of these, one of our 14 assembly of nuclear-armed submarines, one alone contains 5,000 Hiroshima bombs, the equivalent. The equivalent of 5,000 Hiroshimas are contained in just one of these nuclear submarines. And the weapons that are used nowadays, a Hiroshima-type bomb would be considered a tactical nuke. So when you hear our reckless criminal leadership talking about a fightable nuclear war, and they try to reassure you, oh, don't worry, we'll just be using tactical nukes. That's what they're talking about, up to Hiroshima-sized nuclear weapons. So this is absolutely unthinkable. This is another reason why we need to redouble our efforts and remove this criminal misleadership from positions of power. And we need to be in this race. We need to be heard. We need to be on all ballots because these issues need to be front and center in this discussion. Are we going to hear this discussed by Kamala Harris or by Donald Trump or by RFK for that matter, who's extremely cavalier and is supporting the war in the Middle East as if it wasn't a war, claiming to be a peace candidate, even while he's all for this war and for the Zionist incursions that are driving this war. They don't have a clue. So this is, again, a reason for us to double down, to continue with our ballot access drives so that we will be on the ballot for just about all voters. And at that point, the mainstream media can no longer lock us out of the discussion, because when we are in the discussion, we will be driving these issues home to the American people. Winning this choice is all about simply getting to the microphone. When we as Greens have been at the microphone, the American people respond inordinately. And remember, there are huge numbers of the American people who are not in the camp of either of these mainstream parties, even with this new face that the Kamala Harris campaign is trying to put on, that they're supposedly progressive. It's not going to take long for it to be perfectly clear that this is more talking the talk. These are crumbs compared to the transformative policies that we really need and that we are offering. And besides, the Harris-Biden administration has been in effect for 4 years, and where have they been on all of these progressive policies? They are serving their large donors. There are more billionaires than ever behind the Kamala Harris campaign. So this is business as usual. It's really critical that we be there, and we be there as a fighting force. And we do not take no for an answer. We do not take the spoiler propaganda to give it even the time of day. We are absolutely essential in this fight to stand up for the American people and the future that we deserve. I do want to mention also that this crisis that we are facing is especially intense with the events of the last 2 weeks, notably Israel's back-to-back assassinations of the chief negotiator for Hamas in Iran and the assassination of a Hezbollah commander in Beirut, triggering essentially another round of escalation that could easily go off the rails. And the U.S. has been sending more armaments, fighter jets, naval warships, battleships, speeding them into this theater of conflict. Meanwhile, the U.S. is telling Iran and Hezbollah, don't you dare retaliate. But where is our voice of restraint towards Israel, who keeps triggering these greater offenses and these escalations, who is indeed conducting the genocide, which is at the core of this growing conflict? The president has to do nothing but pick up the phone and say that this genocide is over, to say that the weapons embargo against Israel begins now, that the end of all economic support to Israel begins now, that Israel has become an absolute rogue state. But Israel doesn't do this alone. Israel is simply a surrogate for the U.S. here. Israel is completely powerless to conduct this genocide without us. And that's where we come in and the American people come in. And remember that we are 68% of the American people who are demanding an immediate end to this genocide, an end to this war, an end to the occupation, to the ethnic cleansing from the get-go. So we can solve this immediately. This need not be an escalation towards nuclear war or towards a global conflagration. We have the power to solve this right now simply by being there to speak up for the American people and the people of the world who all see eye to eye. It is only the U.S. Congress and the U.S. White House who are behind Israel's absolutely murderous genocidal policy. So most recently, we saw this bombing of yet another school. And this was in Gaza City. The U.S. has dropped, at that time, 3 of these 2,000-pound bombs, killing some 100 people. And the U.S. has provided 14,000 of these 2,000-pound bombs since, actually just since July. It's astounding. The devastation that we see in Gaza is a reflection of the devastating U.S. foreign policy. This blood is on our hands. This is an opportunity for us to stand up with the backing of the American people to say that the murder, the torture, the endless genocide stops here, and it stops now. In the face, it was actually just after that bombing with 3 2,000-pound bombs dropped on yet another school, killing 100 people. It was after that the Harris-Biden administration then appropriated another $20 billion in ongoing armaments. So it tells you how absolutely insane, how absolutely murderous and outrageous U.S. foreign policy is. And this is just this is the leading edge of empire. This is a microcosm of what empire and colonialism look like. So this is a big fight that we need to fight. This is why we need a political transition from the parties of war and Wall Street to the parties of, by, and for the people, for peace and justice and a green future that we deserve. Let me move now to how we are going to create that future that we deserve. And we can begin doing this, of course, by picking up the phone and ending the genocide. We can also do this by cutting the military budget, cutting the military budget by at least half, so that we have a foreign policy that is based on international law, on human rights, and on diplomacy, instead of raw military and economic domination. Right now, that military budget is consuming half of our congressional dollars. We need to be spending that money instead. We would basically be doubling our congressional budget by cutting the military substantially. Instead, we will put those dollars into what we need here at home. And again, underscoring that military budget is impoverishing us and it is endangering us all. The very first thing that we would enact through legislation, the first legislation that our administration will fight for, is for an improved Medicare for all system that covers everyone comprehensively and gives you, by the way, full choice of your doctor and hospital, which is not available under most plans in the private insurance system. By cutting by moving to a Medicare for all system, we essentially save 1 out of every 3 healthcare dollars, which are currently wasted on bureaucracy, red tape, paper pushing, bloated CEO salaries, exorbitant pharmaceutical rates, and so on. All of that gets cut. We save 1 out of every 3 healthcare dollars, which amounts to essentially $500 billion a year that goes back into our budget to spend on the things that we need, at the same time that we are covering everyone. Your health care from head to toe, from cradle to grave, your mental health care, your reproductive health care, which is between you and your healthcare provider, no one else, your dental care, your eyeglasses, your hearing aid, etc. Everything will be covered in this system, and still we save $500 billion a year for just cutting out the red tape and the bureaucracy. We will also push back on the housing crisis, and it's not rocket science to do this. Instead of having housing for greatest profits, we will have housing as a right, as a human right for everyone. Everyone has a right to affordable housing, and half of Americans right now are really struggling for housing that they can securely hold on to. For starters, we need national rent control now. We need to stop this constant acceleration of the costs of housing. So we need to freeze the costs where they are. We need a tenant bill of rights so that you cannot be evicted simply because your landlord wants to throw you out, remodel, and raise the cost of housing. That's essentially gentrification in a nutshell. And by through a tenant bill of rights and rent control, we basically stop gentrification in its tracks. We will also end the takeover of private equity over our housing supply. Private equity, which is buying up millions of units of housing. Instead, we will be building millions of units of social housing, quality, mixed income housing, that you don't lose your residency simply when you get a better job and your income comes back up, because we will be providing good jobs as well. So this is permanent, high quality, affordable housing as so-called social housing or public housing. Our public housing has deteriorated in this country because under Bill Clinton's administration, a law was passed, the so-called Fair Cloth Amendment, which was anything but fair, that basically stopped any investments in public housing. So that housing has been privatized, it has deteriorated, it hasn't kept pace with the times. So we will repeal the Fair Cloth legislation and start investing in housing as a public good. It is an investment which repays very reliably and solidly. There is no reason for us not to be investing in the quality housing that we need now. And by the way, social housing also protects open space. It preserves green space as part of the living environment. And it also is built in conjunction with public transportation, which is renewably powered. So we bypass all the traffic and the gridlock and the pollution that normally comes with building the housing that we need, especially concentrated housing, which we badly need as well to be at transit hubs and to be able to provide the quantity of housing that we need. I want to say a word about the immigration crisis, because we can end the immigration crisis, most importantly, first and foremost, by ending the policies that have created that crisis in the first place. By ending the regime change operations, the endless wars, the economic domination, the war on drugs, and the continuing destruction of the climate that forced so many people to flee their homes and come here begging for safety. So we need to decompress these drivers, and some of them can be decompressed quickly, like, for example, by ending the war on drugs and by legalizing substances in this country, treating substances as a public health issue, not as a criminal issue. And that includes granting amnesty to those who've been jailed for nonviolent possession and use of various substances. The hundreds of thousands of people who are in jail need to be released from jail for what needs to be treated as a public health problem, no longer a criminal problem. And instead of wasting billions of dollars on a border wall that doesn't work, which is deadly for people, deadly for wildlife, and destructive to the environment, instead we will provide an infrastructure for screening and providing permits so that migrants can get to work and become an asset to their communities. Migrants not only pay their way, they make our communities more safe, more secure, and more prosperous. And we will stand up to the demonization and the xenophobia and the immigrant bashing that both parties are engaging in right now. We will instead combat their mythology with the actual truth that, in fact, immigrants lower our crime rate, they don't raise it, that immigrants are not the source of the drugs that are crossing the border. That is white, generally Caucasian Americans that are doing that, not migrants. And that migrants actually contribute and build our economies. One study suggested that migrants will contribute another $7 trillion of economic development to our economy in this country over the coming decade. So we have every reason to be proud and grateful to migrants and apologetic for having displaced them in the first place. And we need to act on that by ending that displacement that is driving the migrant crisis. We will also fight the climate crisis with a Green New Deal on an emergency basis. On day one, we will declare the climate emergency. In doing so, we actually then unleash over $500 billion a year in emergency funding to begin creating the jobs to develop our economy. This is not a question of jobs versus the environment. This is a matter of linking jobs with the environment and creating good union jobs, good paying jobs to create an emergency transition that will eliminate fossil fuels in the next decade. You know, when our Green New Deal was dumbed down and parroted by the Democratic Party, they took out the elimination of fossil fuels. They continued the mythology of Barack Obama that this is kind of an all of the above situation. All of the above doesn't solve the climate crisis. You can't solve the climate crisis by expanding both fossil fuels and renewables. You have to quickly phase out the fossil fuels. That's what nature cares about. People care about renewables, but the climate cares about the fossil fuels. So we need to eliminate the fossil fuels quickly. And as we do that, we are creating the jobs to transition us to green energy, green food production with sustainable agriculture, green transportation, and green housing, as I alluded to with the social housing, which, by the way, would be environmentally sound and renewably powered as well. We can also cancel student debt and medical debt and begin a reparations program to repay the debt that we've owed for 400 years of slavery, segregation, and discrimination, which has robbed African Americans of income, opportunity, housing, and generational wealth. We will respect Indigenous rights, and Indigenous sovereignty, and we will honor treaties and restore tribal lands and bring the U.S. into compliance with the UN Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People. And they'll say, of course, well, how are you going to pay for it? To which we say, no problem. This is not rocket science. We pay for these programs through health savings, through Medicare for All, where, remember, we are cutting 1 out of every 3 healthcare dollars, saving $500 billion a year across the board, through cutting the military budget in half, by taxing the rich and reviving a productive economy instead of the dead-end financialized economy that we are currently saddled with. So I'm going to conclude just by saying we are the one unifying voice. We are the one voice that is of, by, and for the people in this election. We are the ones that we have been waiting for, that America has been waiting for. We have enormous power to build in this election and to potentially win the office, or at least win the day, by establishing a front that will be here to fight for the long haul, for the future that we deserve. As Frederick Douglass said, power concedes nothing without a demand. It never has and it never will. We are that demand. As Alice Walker said, the biggest way people give up power is by not knowing we have it to start with. We have that power. When you put together the 68% of Americans who want an immediate ceasefire and a diplomatic solution to the Gaza genocide immediately, when you add the 1 out of every 2 Americans who are struggling to keep a roof over their heads, When you add the 44 million Americans locked into student debt, the 100 million locked into medical debt, we have not only a quorum, we have not only a majority, we have an unstoppable movement to change the direction of our political process, to break the duopoly, and to be here as a force, not just a contender, but as a truly representative and prevailing force for the future that we deserve, the future that would bring an America and a world that works for all of us. Together, we are unstoppable. Thank you all so much for making this happen, for being here today. And I am so honored to have your nomination and to be officially your candidate, and for us to be working together across the country for this transformation whose time has come. Thank you all so very much.